This evening's Dharma talk is based on a verse out of the Hsin-hsin Ming, or heart mind of Sokuzan or Seng-ts'an, the third patriarch of our lineage. And it is the fundamental nature, the fundamental nature. And this verse says, when the fundamental nature of things is not recognized, in other words, we're grasping at this and rejecting that and shutting down three poisons, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. The way is perfect, as vast space is perfect, where nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess. The fundamental nature. My way of saying this is not separate. We see separations constantly all day long. They show up in our mind. I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's bad, and constant judgment, evaluation. We can't hardly have three thoughts go by without the fourth one, meaning the first three weren't right or were exactly correct. Oh, it's difficult. It's difficult to settle down and just observe what is happening moment by moment without the addition, subtraction, division of the three poisons. How is that done? We can't really stop that. I'm sure you've noticed you can't really reach into your mind and turn down the volume or have some kind of a protocol that helps. Even sitting meditation is, depending on how it's done, how it's practiced, quite often will add to the problem, or might shut it out before it's fully understood. It might try to pretend to be the fundamental nature, like try to be peaceful. We've heard that everything is at rest unless we muddy the water. So we try to invent some kind of peacefulness. May last for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. May last the rest of your life. And you may only discover what you've been stabilizing is artificial when you pass away. This is not a threat particularly. It's just that I would say, don't believe a word I say. Listen, but find it yourself. Find this yourself. All I'm doing, and all any teacher who could be called an actual teacher of this, the Buddha's lineage or dharma, is going to point at that, because it is understood, just as it was with the Buddha, that you have to realize this yourself. This is not a belief system. I'm not saying that there aren't Buddhist practitioners who don't say they believe in Buddhism. Of course there are. They're going to have different kinds of ways of expressing that. But there's nothing to gain, nothing to lose, nothing to ignore. And it has to be seen. You have to actually see this yourself, either on the cushion, observing what comes and goes, by seeing that nothing fundamentally occurs, or by sitting and training your mind so that when you get off the cushion and enter what we call post-meditation, or your everyday activity or lack of activity, you see what is fundamentally true yourself. You see it. You don't conclude something. It wouldn't necessarily result in an aha. Now I see. No, you don't. That's called, in the Zen tradition, that's called makyo. Makyo is illusion. It's an illusion to think you have got it or gained the truth or realized something. So what is it? If you don't know it, if you don't realize it, if you can't say, whew, finally I'm glad that's over. I practiced for 38 years, and the 39th year, I got it. I got it down. I need students now. And the way this shows up with each person is so different. Not that we aren't all apparently human, but it's so different that for one person to try to, with their particular understanding, whatever the depth of that may be, to try to give that to somebody else, to hand it to them, to explain it to them, something like that, that doesn't seem to work. Even if that person is, some lineages say that you need to have the direct pointing at the mind by the teacher. So there's probably something to that in some way. Perhaps. But it seems that you, I, me, we all need to be persistent to be able to see what this is by looking at what it isn't. Over and over and over again. Bring yourself back to square one, back to the Christian. Sit down, hold still, and observe. I'm not saying you couldn't understand this or realize it without any meditation at all. It's possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible. I would say that the possibility of that coming about, that turning about at the basis of consciousness, which is one of the ways that it is often expressed, it could happen without doing too much more than what you're doing already. Seems unlikely. I just spilled a whole cup of coffee in the hojo. So I'd share that with you. Yes.
You said that there's not necessarily like an aha moment, or even that will.
Yes.
You said before, like not notice the before and after, but we're in the middle of the 8-day session that we do every year, and it seems like we're remembering or pointing back to a time with the Buddha that does seem really discrete, like something happened.
Yes.
So what does happen that could be pointed to in that way?
I think that it shows up different for everyone. Some people actually might notice some lessening of discursive thought, lessening of being too concerned about the outcome of things. And another person might not experience that at all. Another person might experience, perhaps, just speculating a little bit, perhaps because they've been covering things up for so long that they begin to practice, and suddenly that whole dark space, that whole, if you want to use a metaphor, garbage heap starts to get exposed. So it could be, excuse me, so it could be very challenging and very different, and could be a totally different situation than the person right next to you who was actually starting to feel better and you're starting to feel worse. So that's why I often say don't compare notes. A little bit, but you don't have to necessarily share what's going on with you. You don't even have to do that with the teacher particularly. They're probably fairly aware of what's happening. More? Sokuzan.
If it looks like we're working with one end of a polarity, how should we relate to the other?
Just keep looking at whatever is showing up, just look at it. Don't abandon what's showing up for something else. That ends up being a circle. A three-pointed circle, called a triangle. I like it, I don't like it. I don't care. I like it, I don't like it, I don't care. I just made that up. Hakran.
How did the Buddha know that he knew?
I don't know. I haven't talked to him in quite a while. I think that he, according to the tradition, whatever you want to call the teaching, is that when the daughters of Mara or his own mind started to attack him, who are you? You don't know. What makes you think you have some kind of understanding? The daughters of Mara, just an image. He touched, as we see sometimes, the images of the Buddha, not ours, but some Buddhas are doing what's called sparsha mudra. They're the Buddha image of the Buddha is touching the ground. He said, "This earth is my witness." The solid, sane grounding of the earth. This is my witness. So he didn't come up with any kind of proof or anything. He just said this. He's sitting on it. You're sitting on it. Every time you take this position, this is the Buddha. Yes.
I never really understand that analogy or whatever that is,
Okay.
touching the earth. So how can the earth be a witness, or what is the witnessing quality there?
Next time you sit down and do sitting meditation, just do that. Just touch and say it. This is the earth. You're sitting on it. You're actually embodied. Consciousness is in this form temporarily.
Is there some difference between this body and this earth?
Not when they're connected. This is what the practice of Ikebana, the practice of Brahmanic awareness practice. Man or woman or consciousness as a human being is connecting heaven and earth. So when you're doing that, you're connecting your mind, your this whole heaven principle, or this whole ethereal, constantly in motion principle to something stationary, the earth, connecting it. Just a way of talking about it. Someone could come along and talk about it just backwards. Go ahead.
Is there something more valid about the stationariness of the earth?
Mm-hmm. It's just a contrast. So, go ahead.
What is not as valid about the etherealness?
I think the circularity of it is not as direct. We're actually avoiding something. We're avoiding this situation. Just like when we sit down, we hold still, we're grounded, and then instead of being grounded, the consciousness gets drawn up into the thought process, going around and around. I like this, I don't like that, this shouldn't be happening. What they said to me was just wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And then the evaluation, should I say something? What's the best thing for me to do? Should I say something back to them, or shouldn't I help them shouldn't I point out to them that they're wrong or they're crazy or we're always all ready to help somebody by pointing out their insanity. Go ahead.
Can there be a groundedness in the thought process?
There could be. It has to show up in consciousness that way, because if it doesn't show up that way, then it's more like ignoring, kind of just turning into just the solidity itself, rather than connecting the ethereal quality, to use that. Like in Ikamana, there's doesn't show here in the video, but there's one of these branches reaches way up, and then other ones are in the middle area here, and then there's a basis or a bowl or a container. There's a piece of wood there at the bottom, so the earth quality is there, and the man or the consciousness or woman presence is there, and if the arrangement is it has a balance to it, then there's a connecting that connects the heaven principle with the earth principle as man or consciousness, connecting heaven and earth. Just a way of talking about it.
Is there something missing if we're just talking about the solidity? Because you talked about the connection between the ethereal and the solid.
So that's the path quality of it, is to connect that. But then once that's done, nothing is separate. This is the Dharmakaya, Nirmanakaya, and Sambhogakaya. And when those all come together, it's Svabhavika-kaya, or the everything coming together is one situation. Just a fancy way of using a bunch of fancy words. I'm not sure what they mean.
What's the difference between the solidity that you're talking about and when we solidify space or thoughts or anything?
Very good. Could be the same thing. It could be something very similar. But if there's a awareness about that solidity, about that congealing into something, then it's not necessarily crystallizing into some kind of a shutting off. It's done with the consciousness itself is doing that, is seeing that, understanding that, including that, letting that be what it is. And you do it every time we sit down and train our mind. What we start in with, perhaps with, well, maybe how we feel at first. And then the mind starts spinning and going this way and that way. And maybe we're going down a grocery list of something. Oh, I need to get that. When I need to, where's my notebook? Kind of thing. How many of you have a notebook hidden underneath your zabuton? That's up. I think I remember Brent gave a story that back in the mid 70s sometime, Allen Ginsberg, the poet who was a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, asked Rinpoche if he could take him a note. He was going into, I think, a 2-week-long solitary retreat. Asked him if he could take in a notebook to kind of make notes. He's a poet, so he wouldn't let him. No, don't do that. Take a notebook with you. So, as far as I know, he didn't. But he might have. Run.
How does the earth relate to the fundamental nature?
I think it's just a metaphor for just about not being separate. If you really reflect on it a little bit, it's kind of an astonishing thing that we ignore, that there are literally billions of people all standing on a huge ball of dirt in the middle of nowhere. And they're all pulled by some kind of invisible force called what? Gravity? One of those, yeah. Where the word gravitas comes from. And we're all stuck to it. And we walk around like it's no big deal. Even though we're standing, if we go straight down, there's somebody else standing the opposite way. Can anybody, just take a minute here, got a minute. Anybody want to explain gravity? Why can you spin an orange and nothing will stick to it? And somebody will say, well, it's because of the mass. What?
Say magic.
Huh?
Don't say magic.
You say magic? Oh, okay, thanks. Think about that anymore. But it is a way that when something is some way, is a way all the time, then we tend to come to conclusions about it that are just based on not wanting to not know. So we just conclude that we're alive, we're here, we're human beings, we live on the earth, we have a family and friends, and we have we don't have quite enough money saved to get a sailboat, but we're working on it. All different kinds of things that are happening in our life. We flesh out this whole lifetime. We've been doing it for quite a long time. And not that you shouldn't, but you could also find out who you are fundamentally. The fundamental what? Fundamental, what was it?
Nature.
Yeah, fundamental nature. I'll read that again. This poem is quite good. This is the one translated by Richard B. Clark. This is quite a good one. When the fundamental nature of things is not recognized, there's some things. There's a thing, there's things. Unspilled coffee is a thing. More people things. Somebody going somewhere, not going somewhere, stopping, starting, moving ahead, slowing down, starting up, getting older, getting younger, whatever you want to call it. When the fundamental nature, we see all these disparate things that traditionally called the 10,000 things, is not recognized. When it's fundamental nature, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. The way, capital W-A-Y, the way, or the way of the Buddha Dharma, is perfect, as vast space is perfect, where nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess. So also characterized by the Dzogchen teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, the great perfection. When one sees this, doesn't miss all the differentiation, doesn't miss all the desire, doesn't miss all of the comings and goings and everything, but sees it as it is. And as it is, like it says in the scroll behind me here, is just this. There isn't anything else. But we are magnetized by the illusion of time and space into something else. What's going to happen next? What will I do tomorrow? Has anybody noticed how days keep going by? Notice that? Is it always the same day? Is it a different day? What is that? You know? Gobble it up. It's like, how do you know about something like that without just thinking, well, one day after another, which is a kind of like this. Find out what it is. Are there different days? Is there a different minute? Are there, how many in the was it Sutta Nipata? One of the early ones text talks about the it's in the Abhidharma, about the 17 moments in a chunk of consciousness. There's actually 17 moments in that. Is that how it was said? Anybody remember? I quoted that one day in here. So, well, but can you find out, if I were to say, well, no, I think there's actually only 14. Or they're missing that 18th one. There's no way. It's just it's just people, human beings, trying to get some kind of a handle on what this whole situation is of consciousness. Very interesting area to explore, and we should do it for ourselves. You should find out the fundamental nature in your consciousness. Find out who this is. Find out what this is. Find out who this is and what that is. That's the original misunderstanding, the original mistaken identity, is that we think there is someone separate from everything else. And that is what's being referred to in this heart mind of Sosan. Yes.
It seems like as a practice, we can't just directly try to perceive the fundamental nature. We have to do it by the opposite of seeing how what we're looking at is not that.
A little of each.
So what are the qualities of something that would be considered not the fundamental nature?
Yeah, we think there's something else. We think we're missing something. We think that something is off a little bit. But it's not. The early Korean, I don't know what century it was, but they would either have a broken teacup, and I think the Japanese do that to some extent. It's called wabi-sabi or something like that. But it's that something that is distressed is actually beautiful as it is. The actual defect is part of its beauty. They would take the cup and glue it back together and put some gold leaf in the glue so it would have a golden crack in the teacup. So it would be the very defect would be part of the perfection. Kind of a romantic idea that those Koreans had.
So does that suggest there's some kind of resolution to that off-kilter feeling?
Yeah, it's already resolved. You don't have to resolve anything. Just stop objecting to everything and agreeing with everything. Both of them are you're just empowering the whole propaganda of something other, something at war, something at peace, something that needs to be done, something changed, something right, something wrong. Not easy, because everywhere you look, things are pretty messed up. The world is, but you don't have to go into that with some idea of repairing it or fixing it based on your limited view. If you still think there's something wrong here, then you will, as I've said hundreds of times, you'll take that and project it off on the other and think they need fixing. And you might be ready to go fix them. And you could be a real true helper.
You see yourself kind of jumping the gun, like you were saying, kind of artificially creating some peace. How can you relate to what's actually showing up there before you're kind of distancing yourself from that?
Just notice that you're distancing yourself rather than try to fixing it. This is why we don't do the traditional practice, Hsin-hsin and Lakdong or Shamatha Vipassana. We don't try to create a meditator who can really see the space. It's not incorrect. It's just I just don't prefer not to teach it that way. I say you should look at whatever this is. If it moves, watch it. If it slows down, watch it. If it goes away, watch what went away. So in other words, whatever's occurring is your meditation rather than some kind of artificial thing of trying to make one more aware of things. Not that there aren't teachers and students who need to work with it that way. Probably a lot more that are doing it that way than this way of not having any reference point particularly, at least one that's stable.
Do we have any influence on the speed of our path?
I heard what you said, but I'm not sure exactly what you're pointing to. Like, can you get to enlightenment quicker? I mean, I'm just trying to paraphrase what it sounded like you're saying. Why is everybody chuckling? It seems like everybody thinks that.
Everyone jump faster.
More better. Well, go ahead.
There's just, I think, an inborn want to do something more effective.
Of course, there is. And the Tibetans, probably all those lineages, all four of the main lineages and the other lineages that are involved in those lineages are all saying that the Vajrayana is you can attain enlightenment in one lifetime. And so I don't know if that's advertisements for Tantra or Vajrayana or not, but yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how else to bring it up without just comparing it to, you've sometimes have talked about people that meditated for 30 or 40 years and maybe still going in the same circles.
Seems like it now.
How can we avoid those pitfalls?
Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Find a teacher that you can give the benefit of the doubt to. Don't trust anybody. You'll know if there's some kind of mutual communication is good. The person is just telling you what to do. That might have worked 1,000 years ago, but not now. So that's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The teaching person, what's being taught, and the community of people who are practicing that. And notice how many different kinds of people they are. And if you find people in that are true believers, this is the only way, that's suspect. More? Oh no, indecision. Didn't you ask a question already?
Yeah, but the next one is from Toji.
Okay, I'll take Toji's question.
Toji asks, what is the relationship between emptiness and fundamental nature?
So, not separate. But it's not the emptiness of absence, it's the emptiness of your imputation or ideas or thoughts or opinions or judgments or conclusions or exclusions about it. You'll notice anytime you look at anything, think anything, hear anything, smell anything, taste anything, do anything, you have ideas that are all crowding around it that actually seal off the fundamental nature of that situation. And what is the fundamental nature? Not separate. Separated into this hand and that hand, but these only can go only so far apart. You can't put this hand in the other room unless this is dead, of course. Anything else from Toji? Sokuzan.
How do I keep looking if it seems like there's nothing to find?
Who's that self-stun? So just continue to do that. Just don't give up. If you were walking up a mountain and you hadn't gotten to the top yet, you have a lot of things there that would kind of help you. Limbs, branches, trees, pine trees, dead birds. Well, on your mountain, there probably wouldn't be any dead birds. Does that help? Why would there be any on your?
Because they're free.
Yeah. They've all been liberated. Yes, Freedom Mountain. Nobody? Nothing. Still thinking about the dead birds. I am too. It's kind of a miracle. The miracle of the dead birds. Yes, go ahead.
I noticed a dynamic today that I thought was interesting. Like I had just a finger twitch, which is something that I would normally consider like mine. Like I can feel the finger, I can see it. It's the same finger that I feel like I'm moving right here. But when it twitches by itself, there's a foreign quality. Like that's not me doing that. What is that? What's that area that's being contrasted between when I think that there's someone that's controlling that?
With just an overlap there, it's just muscles and so on. Just like, do you ever think I'm not just digesting my food?
I am now.
Who's doing that? Yeah. It's the whole idea of the overlaps there and underlaps or whatever you want to call it. Very, very interesting. There are times when, even though you think you're controlling yourself, still I can talk and be totally unaware of my hand gestures. Or the example I often use, you get in the car to go to the store and you know right where the store is at, so you drive there, but you don't remember making any of the turns because you're all embroiled in some kind of thought process around how you're not really sure if they're going to have what you need there, but if that doesn't work, you can go to someone. We're doing so many things at once. And so I mean, similar, maybe not exactly the same thing.
It seems like that distinction can show up in dreams too, where sometimes there's a quality of like me being in a dream. Sometimes it's more of like a distant observation where I'm not identifying with whatever body forms there. Is there anything that shows up that isn't impermanent?
It isn't. Oh, the way you're asking the question, anything that shows up is going to go the other way, going to disappear. If anything's showing up, are you saying something you've been ignoring, that suddenly you see it?
I'm trying to relate to how it's talked about, like who we actually are. Like, is there something recognizable about who we actually are?
Yes. You'll recognize, I'm not guaranteeing it, but you'll sometimes people ask, how will I know? How do you know if you understand and if you're realized, or there isn't anyone to know. So therefore, on one level, you can't know. The way it would show up is that you notice you're not particularly unhappy with anything. You notice there isn't any particularly anything else you want. And even your negativity arising is not a problem. It's just like weather coming and going. You don't mind things coming and going. You also don't necessarily, you're not on board with trying to keep that happening or something as some kind of credential that you're really okay with everything. So there's no one that's actually concluding anything. You might feel like crap because of some particular thing that's arising or going away. The thing you notice that the feeling is there, but there's no identity that feels that way. And I say this in many different ways as I can, and I want you to ask questions about that if you have them. Pardon me. Go ahead.
I was just wondering how what you're describing there is different than the way that I tend to just shut down and gloss over things to where they don't seem like they're that bad.
What's the question?
How is the situation you're describing in someone who...
No glossing. Sometimes they're horrible. So there's no attempt to do anything with it or to minimize it. Like we'd say, well, I'm enlightened, so this shouldn't bother me. So it can still be extremely bothersome. It might be bothersome from now on. It's called suffering, the first noble truth. Isn't it the first one? I think it's the first one. Life is suffering. Wasn't it great if somebody had come along 2,500 years ago instead of saying, well, sometimes we suffer. No, he said, life is suffering. He didn't say part-time. If you think it's happening part of the time, then this is the very nature of ignorance. The big misunderstanding there is that there's actually an entity or an individual that has come together as a being who is suffering sometimes and happy other times, and is going from lifetime to lifetime trying to find happiness, squeeze happiness out of samsara. Yes.
Seems like it's easy to miss suffering if we're relating to it in a way that's like just really intense, like pain or dissatisfaction. But is there a more subtle dynamic of suffering that we might just not recognize as that?
Yeah. It's happening right now. You can feel. You don't have to get rid of anything. You can feel it all the time. You just don't. What I would say is don't add on to it. That way, it's just a direct situation. You just happen to be alive, and so you have nerve endings. So you're not going to be particularly enthralled with this. So you don't have to do anything about it. If you try to do anything about it, it tends to start to get stronger and more polarized and more struggle, more pushing and pulling. We all know, I'm not describing something that no one has felt before. Sometimes we get so entangled in the right and wrong or up and down or accusing someone or accusing ourselves, or it can be anywhere from some kind of pride or some kind of shame or all this polarity of jamming things around and trying to find some kind of positionality that is better than what was going on the last 10 minutes ago. So just receive. If you can, whatever's showing up, be a good hoster.
Could you give an example of one of those baseline sufferings that we might be able to relate to?
I'll try, but you need to be more clear about what you're asking me. Well, 15 or 20 things came up.
What's something that you would consider that you're suffering with right now?
Sound of your voice. He's one of my students.
Low hanging fruit.
It's called sometimes that's called abuse. Am I abusing you?
I'm so nerve dead because of all the abuse. I don't know.
Okay. So, there may be something coming up just because there's nerve endings and not just the touch, taste, smell, hearing, but in the mind. The mind is kind of has some ragged edges, and they may come and go, and the causes and conditions that come along. What are you grinning at? He likes it when I start describing suffering. Coming right back at you. So I'm just saying that the relative nature of the way consciousness is showing up in these human forms is it can be abrasive because the causes and conditions. When I say causes and conditions, you can't count them. They're all a little bit different, and they're all pushing and pulling and shoving and on each other, so that we have all of those things coming together at one time produce this particular feeling or that particular feeling. But there's no individual. That's extra. There's no individual entity, person who is experiencing that and needs to get rid of it or needs to find pleasure and get rid of the pain. There's no being there. So whatever comes and goes, it's just there. It's just arising, and then it goes away. But there's no entity that is imputed someone. It's called the imaginary nature and the teaching of the three natures. More about that? Yeah, actually, I have a nice voice.
Can you say what the difference between pain and suffering is?
A traditional way of talking about that is pain is just the basic existing, just nerve endings that are abraded or don't feel so good. So it's the pain that just comes with being a living being. But then suffering is extra. We're trying to get away from that. Creates more turmoil and creates extra suffering, especially when it's happening in something like the mind. It's like when we have a dream, like a nightmare. Nothing's happening. It's a nightmare. It's unreal. But it's real in the nightmare. And it can be intense suffering based on causes and conditions that are untraceable. What is traceable? Not much. What is true? Fundamental nature. Go ahead.
When it's kind of separated like that, the suffering and the pain having that distinction, is it possible to get rid of that suffering?
Get rid of the suffering of
The extra on top of the pain.
I don't know if you get rid of it, but it would prioritize itself in terms of dependent origination. It may go away, it may come around, may get stronger, may get weaker, but the consciousness that is not separate from that is not concerned, is not looking for something else. It's not looking for that to go away. It doesn't care if it stays, or it's like not being concerned about the weather, just noticing the weather, but not having some kind of an opinion about it, what it should do or what it shouldn't. Go ahead.
How can suffering that we're adding to the situation be just as valid as or dependently arisen?
Because everything is dependently arisen. That's why it's hard to see, because you can't see the imputation of me. We think we can control things. We think our thoughts are real. We validate our thoughts. We even validate our thoughts by saying to ourselves, I shouldn't be thinking that. That's a validation. A little sneaky, but it is one. Go ahead.
So what's being pointed at when it's talked about like the suffering is something that we're adding to it? It sounds like that is something additional.
Mm-hmm. But it's just from the position of me adding something on or not adding something on. But there isn't anyone. So it's dependently arisen. Mm-hmm.
So is there, like you talk about taking a 1/4 inch step back, is it just to see that we're not the thing that's adding that?
Yeah, just to give you a little bit of space. It's just image, I say, just step back a little bit and see what this is. Step back a little more and step back and hope that nothing somebody hasn't stuck their foot out behind you. So it's just to recede, just you're going here, you're producing, you're doing this, and you just recede a little bit and just watch what continues to shuffle around and move. It's just the observing of that is fundamentally leads us into an understanding of dependent origination and of realizing our fundamental nature, our Buddha nature. Go ahead. Other questions?
Question from Greg in the UK.
Mhm.
How do we know if our will for enlightenment and liberating sentient beings is actually a self-centered impulse and not a selfless drive?
I think this is why it's necessary if we're talking about the Buddha's dharma, which is the only understanding I have, basically, that if you have someone who's a teacher or a guide or a mentor, someone who can help you with this, who isn't going to be your slave driver, but as someone who's going to support you in seeing this, then and you're going to have some confidence in that this person is going to help you, and the teaching that they're, however they're teaching, whatever they're talking about, seems to resonate with you, and you have some kind of connection. And then the community, possible community that's there. So I don't know how else to, unless you ask the question in a different way, or unless I misunderstand what you're asking me, I would say that seems to be a pretty good formula or structure for proceeding on the path. A community gives you a community that's not going to buy into your self-deception and support you. And the teaching is not going to, the teachings are not going to contradict the teachings coming out of the Buddha's teaching down through the centuries, including the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, even though the Vajrayana has problems. They all have some problems, and some teachers have problems, but we have to start somewhere. And so I would say basically trust yourself. I often say, don't believe a word I say, and I mean that. I don't want followers.
Question from Bhaskar. Is the separation from the fundamental nature the basic suffering common to all sentient beings?
Yes. It is. But it's not about getting rid of that. It's about actually seeing that in your own life, on your own cushion, looking at a wall, holding still, looking at the relationship to the way we relate to others, the way others relate to us, and just watching it without adding any kind of judgment, evaluation, or conclusion on top of it, if you can.
You mentioned earlier the three natures. What are they?
So there's the dependently arisen. This is dependent on everything else for its appearance. Then there's the imaginary nature, which is added on to that. Our ideas about it, who it belongs to. It's a good table or a good altar, a bad one. It shouldn't be there. It should be a little taller. It should be a little shorter. So something arises, and we make up stuff about it. We don't just see things as they arise. And then, so those are the first two, paratantra, parikalpita, dependent, imaginary. And then the third one is parinishpana, or the perfected nature. And the perfected nature is seen when we see that the dependently arisen, and we see the fundamental truth of that situation, dependently arisen and imaginary. We understand what that is. We deeply understand what that is. This is the perfected nature. So, and when you see that, you're not into trying to find some particular imperfection and twist it, or including making yourself better, tamping yourself down, or other people, or controlling people, and on and on. Shows up differently with each person in each life form.
As soon as that perception hits us, of seeing without adding or subtracting or feeling, we are experiencing the fundamental nature of reality.
You might not be experiencing it, but you're not separate from it. We crave experience. We think that's proof of failure, proof of success, proof of it not being important, passion, aggression, and ignorance. So if you realize the truth fundamentally, then you're not separate from it. So you can't help but be that. Yes.
And that can come and go as we're on the path.
Once it shows up, you're pretty much dead meat. Your personal life is over, is what I'm saying. It's kind of a dumb way of saying it, but you don't really, you still have a personal life. You still, you're still at the store trying to decide which kind of vegetables have the least oxalates in them. I mean, you're still making relative choices. You're still functioning. You might be more ordinary than the people around you because you're not doing anything about what? Buying vegetables. Everybody else is tied up, or not everybody, but people are tied up in their ideas about what they should do. They aren't even present. They aren't even in the room looking at the cabbage. They're off somewhere else, or they're thinking about what somebody else is wearing, or why they're treating their kids that way all the time. So they're tied up in their world. They're imputing some kind of person who's better than that person or isn't as well off or something. Whereas someone who is just not separate just functions. They just function, and they don't particularly come up with any bright ideas about themselves. Go ahead.
I can remember a time when, certain things really would trigger me and set me off, and I can see now that those things don't do that. So, but there are other things that will come in my path and I'm completely tripped up.
I understand. Which question?
So where's the fundamental nature in my practice there?
The fundamental nature is already the case. It's just that the imputed self of somebody it blocks that understanding. So we need to actually see that there is no, when you say, if I said, simply put, if I said, who are you? You might say your name. But I said, no, who are you really? You might touch your chest like and say, I'm me. That's the misunderstanding. There's a solid being here that has a case history and a life and has emotions coming and going, and the sense of me. Find out if there's someone there. When I say find out, you have to look at it. Sit down, hold still, whatever's arising. You could even say that. I don't promote that kind of what's called atma-vichara, or self-inquiry, but you could. I would rather have that arise for you spontaneously. Find out who this is. Good luck. And what I say on top of that I was told by my teacher, you can do this. You can do it. You can do it. This isn't impossible. Just difficult. Yes.
If there were someone here, what would show up when we looked who was here?
Then it would be, I'm the person that feels really good or feels like crap, or I'm the person who would be some kind of a ongoing idea about that. It's called imaginary. And if we start to get close to that, as I'm not the only one that says this, that we start to get worried about that, because that feeling of not existing is frightening, can be frightening to the ego mind, the self-centered mind. It's not something you have to get rid of. You have to get rid of the ego. Ego, once you see that it's unreal, then it might hang around for the next 80 years. Create a lot of problems for other people, but not for you. Chuckle, chuckle. Yes. You're just scratching your ear. Okay. Take one more if you have one. Yes, Hugh.
If we are sitting and see something's moving
Mhm.
that's distressing us, can we use that as an e-point like you do in opening young mind?
A little bit. I understand what you're following. I mean, I can't go into that because of time and because that's a different teaching. But yeah, as a place where you're just looking at that, yeah, you could do that. Just look at it. Don't have to push on it. Don't have to pull on it. And you could move your awareness away from it if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah, that is, I guess in terms of the sense fields, would that be a periphery?
It would be a periphery, yes. So basically what Kuyuan's asking about is something where we do is a practice opening the eye mind where your eye organ is on one spot, but you can move like I'm looking at the computer screen here, but I'm actually, right now I'm aware of Kozan. And you can also move and look. You can switch those around. You can actually move your awareness from the awareness back to the eye, where the eye is focused, back and forth. Just a way of working with consciousness so that you're not always on default. You're actually using your sense fields, all 580 of them. Well, exaggerate a little bit. But there are. Add them up. Count everybody in here. See how many there are, including the disembodied spirits. Thank you.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books.
You put this back in.
I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. We continue to appreciate all the help that you give us financially. We also take donations online through PayPal. We have the ability to take a debit and credit card as well. And checks in the mail are always welcome. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. San Chi Chiku Shison Gu Samoko Sa Moko the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, its buildings, gardens, and all adjoining areas from any and all dark or negative energy. Remove and dissolve any negative energy or devices. Fill everything and everyone with light. Please shield and protect with light our teachers, monks, students, and all practitioners of the Dharma, our families and friends from negative forces and energy from now on. Help us to realize the truth of the Buddha's teachings.